started. It is 6:30. There is no flag in here to salute, so we're going to skip that, and we're going to go to roll call. Let's see. We have Commissioner Yesny, Commissioner Leba, myself, Commissioner Griswold, and lots of staff.
We have a quorum.
We have a quorum. And now I am going to read the hearing procedures, where did they go? Here they are. And Commissioner Allen has joined us. Yes, you are sitting in the right spot. Yes, start on time, end on time, respect your time. All right, so here's the summary of hearing procedures, and I'm just going to read what's written here. If you want to address the commission, please fill out a speaker card located on the table near the audio-visual technician. Actually, today we're in a different location, so I think, are they over on the side table, the cards, I believe? Yep. And deposit the completed card in the basket. There are also speaker cards in the back of the chambers. Anyway, we're not in the chambers, so they're over there. The procedure for this hearing is as follows. After the staff report, applicants and appellants may make a 5-minute presentation. The chair will call out names on the submitted speaker cards in the order received. As your name is called, line up in front of the microphone at the front of the chamber. Each speaker will have 2 minutes. Speakers using a translator will have 4 minutes. After the public testimony, the applicant and appellant may make closing remarks for an additional 5 minutes. Planning commissioners may ask questions of the speakers. Response to commissioner questions.
That's hard of hearing, can't hear you.
Does that help?
That's better.
Okay. Planning commissioners may ask questions of the speakers. Response to commissioner questions will not reduce the speaker's time allowance. The public hearing will then be closed, and the Planning Commission will take action on the item. The Planning Commission may request staff to respond to the public testimony, ask staff questions, and discuss the item. If you challenge these land use decisions in court, you may be limited to raising only those issues you or someone else raised at this public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the city at or prior to the public hearing. The Planning Commission's action on rezonings, pre-zonings, general plan amendments, and code amendments is only advisory to the City Council. The City Council will hold public hearings on these items. Section 20.120.400 of the Municipal Code provides the procedures for legal protests to the City Council on rezonings and pre-zonings. The Planning Commission's section on conditional use permits is appealable to the City Council in accordance with Section 20.100.220 of the Municipal Code. Agendas and a binder of all staff reports have been placed on the table near the door for your convenience. All right. So moving on, we have call to order and orders of the day. And next is public comment. And this section is intended for people who would like to comment on items that are not agendized. So I'll read what it says here. Public comments to the Planning Commission on non-agendized items. Please fill out a speaker's card and give it to a technician. Each member of the public may address the commission for up to 3 minutes. The commission cannot take any formal action without the item being properly noticed and placed on an agenda. In response to public comment, the Planning Commission is limited to the following options: responding to statements made or questions posed by members of the public, or requesting staff to report back on a matter at a subsequent meeting, or directing staff to place the item on a future agenda. And I'm looking to see if I have any items that are in this. So I do not. So we're going to go ahead and move on to deferrals and removals from calendar. Anything, staff? All right. I see shaking heads. So moving on to the consent calendar, and we do not have any items on consent. So we're going to go ahead and move to item 5, the public hearing. And we have one item, and I'm going to read here what it says. Generally, the public hearing items are considered by the Planning Commission in the order in which they appear on the agenda. We have one, so there will be no surprises. However, please be advised that the commission may take items out of order. Okay, anyway, got that. There we go. So we're going to start with 5A, and I believe we want to start with the staff report.
Thank you, Vice Chair. PDC 17047 and PD 18015 is a signature project at approximately 1410 South Bascom Avenue. They're applying for up to 600 units, and in their PD permit, a maximum of 590 units in multifamily, and a 200,000 square foot office building, in addition to providing a publicly accessible but privately owned and maintained plaza of approximately 42,000 square feet between the two properties. This project, as I mentioned, is a signature project which is allowed to proceed prior to the adoption of an urban village plan. This is within the South Bascom North Urban Village Plan, and this project was submitted and deemed a signature project under the criteria as required prior to its adoption in May of 2018. I want to briefly go over the requirements of the signature project and mention how this conforms, and then respond to some of the questions I received, and then wait for more questions later. So signature projects are appropriate on sites that have the urban village residential or commercial land use designations. This property, when it was submitted, had a neighborhood community commercial land use designation complying with this requirement. They also are required to provide job growth capacity that is in excess of their, what we call their fair share of commercial in the entire urban village boundary. So for this site, there's an existing approximately 78,000 square foot shopping center divided into multiple buildings. And this project's fair share is around 100 to 115,000 square feet. And so staff has the discretion as part of the signature project process to determine what their fair share should be of the entire village. And we determined that 200,000 square feet was their minimum required, and the applicant and their proposal complies with that. In addition, signature projects must be in prominent visible locations in the village. This serves as a gateway to the entire village, being at a prominent corner of South Bascom Avenue and Bascom Avenue, serving as a gateway into the actual city from Campbell. Additionally, as mentioned previously, signature projects provide public parklands or privately maintained but publicly accessible open spaces. This project provides a publicly accessible open space that is privately owned it's almost an acre, it's like 42,000 square feet, which will have public access easements as well as other required legal documentation that it's maintained publicly accessible 24/7 to all users, not just the users of the site. Also required is the pedestrian-friendly design. Staff believes that this has been maintained. The project is providing many improvements, including the buildings being built up to their front setbacks, the increase of the public sidewalk to 20 feet, the inclusion of lush landscaping to create a pleasant pedestrian environment. They also are putting a connection. The plaza serves as a direct connection from South Bascom Avenue to the adjacent Bascom light rail station through the center of the site that can serve as a faster way for people to connect to our transit resources. Also, they have their residential balconies and their office use facing onto the plaza as well as onto South Bascom Avenue. They also, across from Southwest Expressway and the light rail station, have what we call eyes on the street with their balconies and their open spaces for the office building facing onto those uses. This project had 2 official community meetings. So part of the signature project criteria is their substantial outreach. We conducted 2 community meetings, and each of them had a really good turnout, and many of the people I see here today, where there was a dialogue with the public about their wants and not things that they didn't like about it, and the project has evolved since then. Demonstrates high quality architecture, landscape, and site design features. Staff believes that the project demonstrates a variety of different high quality materials. There's good articulation to the building facade. Staff believes that the roof line provides, from the pedestrian level, a certain level of variation that doesn't provide just a flat roof. Maybe we'll talk about that more. and is consistent with the recommendation of the urban design review process. So we contract with a professional urban design firm who provides comments on these plans to help supplement our comments, and many of their comments are consistent with what staff had provided and have been implemented into the project. I do want to provide an update to the staff report to read into the record. I neglected to mention that the residential building is including 590 bicycle parking spaces, my mistake of omission. And the office building has 43 of its own bicycle parking spaces, so I want to make sure that's reflected. Specific comments that were received, and I was asked to read into the record. So this project, we've talked about the roof line. We look at it from the pedestrian level as well as the elevation. They do reflect differently. So when you're at the specific perspective of the street, the roof line reads differently, and the applicant can show this in their presentation. The tree removals on site, the applicant is required to replace, they're removing 17 ordinance-sized trees and 1 non-ordinance-sized trees. And an ordinance-sized tree is one that measures 38 inches in circumference around its trunk at 4 feet when measured from the ground, just for clarity. They're actually required to replace with 70 trees on site. They instead are actually going way above that requirement at 245. So I wanted to read that into the record. There were multiple comments received from the public, and to talk about affordable housing, there's a desire for the project to include affordable housing on site. I wanted to provide clarity that this is not a requirement under our ordinances. In fact, when these ordinances were brought forward, the city was sued, and we were required to provide multiple options to satisfy our affordable housing requirements. And one of those is the option to pay an in lieu fee. So we cannot legally require them to build on site as long as they satisfy. Let's see. There was a desire to see retail at the site, specifically retail. Retail is not a requirement that at the planning level we require specifically. We're looking at overall at commercial, which can be satisfied as retail. The project itself, in its zoning parameters, they can build up to 300,000 square feet if they come in for a subsequent permit of commercial on site. The reason this is important is as the market changes over time, the applicant or future applicants or owners, whoever owns the property in the future, can apply to build retail if it becomes something that the market can support, or they can choose to expand their office use. That can be done in both the residential building and in the office building as proposed. And this can be offset by reducing parking over time as the market supports that. There were comments about the public plaza and the parking garage facing the plaza. Unique to the site, as you can see in the site plan, Southwest Expressway, which you would think would be treated as the rear of this property, is not the case. This property is very uniquely constrained given its triangular shape. It also has almost has like 2 fronts along most of it. The rear of it faces Sonador Commons to the north, and then the office buildings that are there. I think the Girl Scouts may be in one of them. And so there's a unique design challenge. How do you hide parking in a way where you don't have a traditional rear to a site? And this is something that we worked very closely with the applicant on and with the community. There's a desire to maintain a certain level of parking to not impact the existing neighborhood, and also to make sure that properties are leasable. We don't want to build something that we cannot lease because it's not meeting market demand. And so in that way, the applicant has screened, put 2 levels of the parking underground, which is pretty much the maximum they can do with the high water tables that we have, as well as the railroad ties from the adjacent tracks that we have, and for the light rail itself, and then the freight line that goes through, as well as has 4 levels above ground. Those are shielded with undulating artistic panels, as in addition to landscaping treatments. And this is the trade-off that we have to be able to get the amount of parking that is necessary to have a viable commercial space at this time, which, as I mentioned before, could change in the future if the market supports that. There was a request about sustainability measures. The applicant will talk about this a little bit more in their presentation. But many of the requests for sustainability are met by the project just by its locational criteria and the mix of uses. And the CEQA team may speak a little bit more to this, but locational requirements, you reduce your overall impacts, where it's for traffic, for greenhouse gases and other things, by locating yourself near transit lines and locating uses that are complementary to one another near each other. As far as the specifics, if they're gonna achieve LEED Silver certification, those are figured out in the subsequent building permit stage. They're not determined during our planning approval stage, so I wanted to provide that clarity. They haven't determined what those are gonna be at this point. There were concerns about the intersection, I'm almost done, I promise. The intersection at Bascom Avenue and Southwest Expressway. There are a lot of concerns about the safety of that intersection. It was reiterated numerous times by community members at both community meetings, and I understand is of concern tonight. This entire corridor of South Bascom is being re-envisioned through the South Bascom Complete Streets Initiative that VTA, so the Valley Transportation Authority, and the city of San Jose, I believe Campbell and Los Gatos are participating in, and we can provide more details if necessary, where they're re-envisioning the entire corridor holistically. And so as part of that effort, they will be relooking at that intersection as it is part of that corridor to see what sort of safety measures can be implemented. This project, there's no legal nexus for us to require them to do improvements at that point because it's not on their physical frontage. However, they will be installing a traffic signal at Pamlar, which actually has gone through a traffic warrant study. And they are being conditioned to implement that to provide pedestrian safety across South Bascom, which is of great concern to the community. Lastly, park in lieu fees there's a concern about park in lieu fees and where they're spent. So the Parks Department has a requirement they spend their park fees, which they'll be collecting from this applicant, within the same council district. They work with their council member to make a determination about if they could purchase land that is potentially available throughout that district itself. If that is not what works out for this that particular fund of money, they can use that money to build new improvements on existing park infrastructure or lands, or they can fund repairs at existing recreational facilities that were within 3 miles of this project site. So I want to provide that clarification about where the money goes. It does stay in the district and it stays relatively close to this project site. And lastly, for housing affordable in lieu fees, the housing department does not have locational criteria similar to parks, and so they put all of their in lieu fees into one citywide pot, which is then distributed out to people through a bidding process, the affordable housing builders that take that money and can spend it. However, they are looking at what they're calling loosely a dispersion policy moving forward, where they're looking to see if they can identify sites throughout the city where they can be spending that money to build the affordable housing that we need. I want to provide that clarity. That concludes staff presentation. Hopefully I covered the comments.
Thank you. Before we invite the applicant up, are there any questions for staff at this time? And let the record show, Commissioner Oliverio has arrived.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate the presentation. I caught most of it in the car. Question for you on the timing of commercial versus housing. What is, again, is the method that ensures the commercial is built?
Right, so there's a permit condition as well as in the ordinance, the development standards require that the commercial and residential building permits be issued together. And so they have to get their building permits at the same time, and then we won't issue their certificates of occupancy for their residential building until they've gotten it for their commercial building.
And how has staff utilized past circumstances to ensure? I think we've had situations in the past where both residential and commercial approved, we only get the residential, maybe they sell off that portion, economic times change, they don't want to build commercial. Of course, they could come back to the city and through the process to change that, but ultimately you feel that this process will ensure that both office and residential would be built.
Correct. Our other signature projects have the same conditions, and it has been successful. The orchard is under construction, and they are building both at the same time.
Great, thank you very much.
Mhm.
If there are no other questions, I wanted to invite the applicant up to make a presentation. You have 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Brian Wolf. I'm a partner at Bay West Development. Thanks for having us here today. I wanted to start out really by thanking a few people. This has been a long process for us. Like Jennifer said, we submitted our original application for our PDZ permit in 2017, and there are a number of people along the way that have been extraordinarily helpful that I think is important to recognize here. First of all is the community. We've had a number of community meetings and outreach meetings, not only for this project specifically, but when we first submitted our application for this project, the urban village plan was not yet adopted, so there were urban village plan meetings in addition to project-specific meetings for this site. The plans have changed and iterated over time based on that community feedback, and I'd like to commend the community that throughout all the meetings, it was very cordial. It was lively discussions back and forth of what people liked and didn't like, and I think what we're showing you today is a result of that. Secondly, Councilmember Davis and her office have helped us along the way and provided their feedback through the different iterations after various community meetings or as we were throwing around site plans in the very beginning of this process. What I'd like to say about her office is that many of the comments that we received from Councilmember Davis were the exact same comments that we received from our community meetings, which we do work in a lot of different municipalities, and it's not often that the council member in a particular district is as in touch as she was with her community members, and it just is a testament to the work that she does and the outreach that she does through her office. Third of all, to our architect, WRNS, our entire design team, we really challenged them with this project to create kind of a true gateway into the city of San Jose. I think they've achieved that and balanced all the different various parties who have commented on it, whether it be us, whether it be the community, staff, council, and I think they've done a wonderful job, and you'll see here tonight what that is. And then finally, city staff and primarily Jennifer Piozze, who's led this process for the last 2 years. Her help with us understanding, this is the first time we've gone through a signature project, and her guidance through this process and making sure that all the various parties got heard to create what we have today is very appreciative. But anywhere from planning, parks, VTA, everybody, Public Works has been wonderful in seeing us and being available to us to answer questions and create what we have today. With that said, I think the one thing I want to hit before my time's up is, if you don't mind hitting, talk about some of the community benefits of this project and how those comply to the urban village plan. First of all, we were challenged with creating a gateway entrance into San Jose. That's defined in the urban village plan and was the key to our thesis in how we designed this project. That's what led to the office building being on the southern portion of the site as you transition in from the city of Campbell to San Jose. We think that is a beacon to enter into San Jose. Secondly, is an employment center. We are providing 200,000 square feet of office, which is 2/3 of the entire capacity for the entire urban village plan. That was key with Councilmember Davis to really create a vibrant employment center in this location. Pedestrian and bicycle connection. We're installing a signalization at Pamlar. Right now, as it's set up today, Bascom Station, the VTA light rail station, all the residences on the west side of Bascom Avenue have no direct access to Bascom Station to access light rail. One of Councilmember Davis's keys to this entire project was being able to create that connection, introducing the signalized intersection there, and then creating the plaza connection between the two buildings as that connection, I think, in my opinion, is the most important community benefit to this project. Providing a public plaza and open space, we can go in that in further detail. Widening the sidewalks, 20 feet sidewalks, all up and along Bascom Avenue. Setbacks and stepbacks according to the daylight plane in the urban village plan. This is not a requirement under a signature project. Throughout the community meetings, we have continued to evolve our plans. We thought it was important for Sonador Commons and the community members that live in those condo projects to be able to have that daylight plane accessible to them. It cost us some units, honestly, but we think it created a better project, not only for us, but for the community as a whole. Building heights, while the urban village plan calls for 150-foot height limits, our project is 11 and 65 feet lower than those building heights, with still being able to maximize density on the site. Speaking of densities, again, 2/3 of all commercial space allocated to this entire urban village plan we're providing on site, as well as 590 new housing units to the city without taking away any other housing units and without a pure net 590 units. And then finally, parking, which has honestly been one of the biggest fights back and forth, if you will, of the city's desire to reduce parking in a transit location like this, and the community's desire to not have overflow parking into their streets, and then from an applicant's perspective, to have an appropriate amount of parking to be able to have this be viable in the near term, so we can build this project. I think what we've come to is a fair resolution of that for everybody. Our overall project is a 15% reduction in parking code. It's a 18% reduction on the residential side and a 12% reduction on the office side. We can go into that in further detail later, but that number has fluctuated up and down through these community meetings, and I think we've gotten to a point that is fair and equitable for all of the community. I'm happy to answer questions as they come up. And I have a number of slides in the future of renderings and stuff like that, so if there's specific questions, then we can address them through those pictures.
Thank you. Do my fellow commissioners have any questions for the applicant at this time? Okay, seeing.
Questions for us?
No, not yet. All right, thank you. So now, I believe we need to open the public hearing. And I have 3 speaker cards. If you want to speak, be sure to fill out a card on the side table and turn them in and have them passed up to me. And so we're going to go ahead and get started with Alex Shore. Oh, and before you get started, is where staff just left, but in terms of timing, since I don't have a timer, is someone take?
Use a phone, maybe?
Yeah, but anyone else want to help keep track? Or is there something I'm not aware of in terms of a timer somewhere hidden? All right. I'm going to count in my head.
It's actually an electric shock.
Okay.
Yeah, safe word.
All right. It's going to make like a really loud, obnoxious buzzing noise when,
No, it just blinks, so.
all right. All right, thank you. Go ahead, Alex.
Hi, my name is Alex Shore. I'm the Executive Director of Catalyze SV. Planning Commissioners, you should have received about 15 letters from us, from our members, asking for improvements to this project before it gets approved. Improvements like building affordable housing on site, so we have inclusive, diverse communities, building in a more active plaza through retail on the site, ensuring that there are greater sustainability features, reducing the number of parking spaces so that we can build up our transit system and get people living in our city in a more healthy way, walking around. The Urban Village talks about, for signature projects, a process through a substantive opportunity for input by interested community members. The developer made no improvements to the project based on Catalyze SV's recommendations, so I'm concerned about how that fits in with the signature project. I'm also concerned with something I heard from this planning commission a few weeks ago when we were in chambers, which is worry about being sued, and sued for not approving projects or following the rules. I'm also worried about being sued by our children and our children's children. We are in a housing crisis. We continue to operate as a suburban 20th century city when we need to be an urban 21st century city. And I am worried that our children are going to look at this and say, how is this a signature project according to a city's standards? This should be the highest quality project in our city, and I'm concerned that this one is not. I want us to be looking just as much at what the future development of our city needs to look like as we worry about whether we're going to get sued by a landowner. So let us think more to the future and less to the past. I hope you'll consider Catalyze SV's input and recommendations on this project. Thank you.
Yeah, it does have a noise. All right, thank you, Alex. Next person is Andrea Kyle, followed by Karen Gauss.
Hi, my name is Andrea Kyle, and I actually live at the Palomar HOA community, which is directly north of this site. I'm actually very happy that I was able to listen to Catalyze SV's information before I stepped up, because they didn't participate in any of our community meetings. They've decided to now, at this point where you are almost ready to break ground, to come in and complain. Dick Center is a blight. Dick Center has been a blight since I moved into the Palomar HOA community in 2004. Anything is better than what is there now. I have participated in all the community meetings, and overall, I've been impressed with Bay West. I've been impressed with Jennifer. They have done a wonderful job trying to improve what is truly just a terrible site. And my biggest concern is the parking. And Jennifer, I'm sorry, what is the current parking?
Oh, sorry, give me a second. Residential is at 590 and the office is at 600 spaces.
Okay, I'm still concerned with that, considering that there's 590 units, which is one parking space per unit. I understand that the future is going to be mass transit, but as I've said in other community meetings, people live where they can afford to live. And sometimes you don't get to take light rail to work because that's not where you work. You don't work in downtown San Jose. You're working in Saratoga. You're working in Mountain View. You're working in Redwood City, and places that you cannot get to via mass transit. So I think it's very important for you guys to really remember that this community, the community I live in, we already have a parking issue. And cutting down that parking is truly, truly going to affect everyone within this entire map view that you're looking at right now. So I really encourage you to increase the parking. And I'm sorry that other people are blinded by that. Jennifer has said that there is an option for reduced parking at another time. So thank you.
Next person is Karen Gauss.
Good evening. My name is Karen Gauss. I'm a Community Outreach Supervisor at VTA. I'd like to thank the city and the developer for working with VTA on the site plan when land use and transportation coordination is very important. VTA is interested in this project because we are here to ensure safety at and near our transit facilities. Together, we will continue our work with the California Public Utilities Commission and the Federal Railroad Administration to make sure that rail crossings are safe. VTA does not support San Jose's quiet zone in this area. We feel that blowing the horn is the most effective way of alerting people that a train is coming. In recent weeks, the city, the CPUC, VTA, and the FRA have conducted a 2-day audit of the entire San Jose quiet zone, including the right-of-way adjacent to this project. The FRA noted a number of improvements, including signs, road markings, signaling, swing gates, pedestrian elements that would be needed to be constructed if the city were to add development in this area and wants to continue the quiet zone. The city's application to reaffirm the quiet zone, which VTA is not co-sponsoring, is currently pending. I have a copy of the quiet zone diagnostic review meeting notes. VTA feels this information should be included before entering into any final agreements on this development. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Great. Next person is Charles Wagner, I believe it says, followed by Sylvia Carroll.
I'm Charles Wagner. I'm a resident on Whitethorn. At the various meetings that were held to discuss this project, frequently the issue was raised about how tall this is in comparison with the neighborhood. It completely is out of whack in terms of the neighborhood. It may fit into your urban plan, but it does not fit into the neighborhood. As I understand it, it's 8 stories high in the residential and 10 stories in the commercial. Is that accurate? You know, the
Correct.
buildings in the area are like 4 stories tall maximum. In addition, I expect that we're going to have big parking problems throughout the neighborhood. And I expect we'll be back to the city asking for some kind of residential permit parking because that's what it's going to come down to. In addition, Bascom Avenue getting on to 880 already stacks up badly. And I don't know what effect this is going to have, particularly if you're going to narrow Bascom, which I think is part of the plan, not of this entity, but of the city. So those are my concerns.
Thank you. Next up is Sylvia Carroll, followed by Jake Tonkel.
I'm Sylvia Carroll, and what concerns me is the lack of affordable housing. And I understand that there's an in lieu fee that's going to be paid. And where is the affordable housing going to go that will be financed by this in lieu fee? And I challenge any commissioner on this board to tell me the site of one, each of you, one site for affordable housing. I hear silence. So you have no sites, so you're going to let them put in a housing project with no affordable housing. It's disgraceful, and I'm very disappointed. There's certainly a lack of transparency. Thank you.
Next up is Jake Tonkel, followed by Larry Snyder.
My name's Jake Tonkel. I live on Pamela Avenue. We're the third house in from Bascom, so pretty close. I would actually like to echo the comments of Catalyze SV as someone that needs to move out of my mother's house at some point in my life. Having affordable housing on site needs to be a priority so that we can continue to live in the neighborhood. I know that there are empty commercial buildings all up and down Bascom Avenue that are run down, that could easily be turned into larger, more upgraded commercial sites while we make this site perhaps a lower height limit and more housing. But I would love to also listen to the commissioners and Bay West to hear more about what a transition might be like from when this doesn't fill up with commercial, because there are so many empty commercial buildings right down the street. How do we change that into housing? Because we know we need it. Thank you.
Larry Snyder.
I'm Larry Snyder, live on Pamlar Avenue. My concern at this point is the traffic signal on Pamlar. Campbell Avenue and Bascom has a no-through lane into residential. It has a red no-go. There's one on, Campbell has one on Home Depot where it does not go into residential. I would like to see that traffic signal only coming out, go left or right, only going in, left or right. There should be no thoroughfare whatsoever. None.
I believe we have another speaker card, and I believe it's Randy Kinman.
Thank you, Chair Ballard and Planning Commission. Randy Kinman, Sherman-Oaks Neighborhood Association. This project is within our neighborhood boundaries. You received a letter from us that incorporates our views and those of our neighbors. There was a process prior to this project. A decade ago, the community became involved in what was eventually rolled out as the urban village component of our general plan. We turned out for all the VTA and city planning sessions for the Bascom and Southwest corridors. It was standing room only for these meetings, including the meetings for this project. This project is presented, represents thoughtful and collaborative work that is a respect for our neighborhoods. That's why I ask that you approve the plan and consider our recommendations with the weight they deserve. We are not NIMBYs. We are not deficient in understanding the planning process. You've also received a number of letters from people who attended none of these meetings, do not live here, have never contacted us, and show no understanding of the big picture, but have opinions. We are the residents who actively spoke out for housing that will not benefit us in park fees. During the UV discussions, we called for senior, low-income, transitional, supportive, and workforce housing closer to VMC to support the people who utilize or work at that campus. Not once have we asked for retail along the light rail line. Nobody has to worry about the plaza being activated because there's not a public park for more than a mile. Design the plaza to be people-friendly, and you'll find hundreds of moms with kids, seniors, and other residents willing to activate the plaza. Retail needs to move if it's going to move to the Bascom side and connect with existing retail. We will continue to ask that affordable housing and park fees be spent within or adjacent to the urban village. We stand against any reduction of parking. We stand against any height increase or increase in housing units. This is a transitional project, not a downtown project. I want to thank Mr. Oliverio for reminding us all that the trigger for commercial is needed because Fruitdale Station has been there for 20 years and I still don't have any commercial. I do want to thank the staff and the developer for their time. And can somebody put me on the list for the VTA sound thing, the no noise, just however that happens. Thank you.
I have a question, actually, Randy. Does anyone else have a question? First and foremost, thank you for the letter. It showed clearly that you guys have been paying attention and you know what you're talking about. So thank you. I have a question about the parking, because typically as a bike advocate, you would imagine that I tend to be one of those people that supports reducing parking. In looking at the site, I'm wondering, in terms of fear, can you explain more the fear around parking? Because when I look at the site intuitively and when I drive it, I think to myself, there's so many, Bascom's so wide, you've got the tracks, where if I live across the street, well, there's a mobile home park, but say I'm living in the condos, like I don't think I would, I mean, it's just like spillover parking is so inconvenient, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, where would you spill over? Because you'd have to cross Bascom or you'd have to cross tracks. So can you talk about that?
The spillover traffic is spillover traffic. What we have here is a transitional project. It's not a downtown project. It's not a downtown core project. And it's going to, because it's coming in at the head and at the beginning of the urban village plan, is going to see a lot more people living in it than it normally would, than you would expect of a project, say, 10 years from now. So there is concern. Those parking spaces can be converted to something more useful. Right now, our experience, and I'll bring back Fruitdale Station again, which is the next closest one about a mile down the road, has significant spillover parking that goes blocks into the neighborhood. So right now, people on the other side of Southwest from this project are using the VTA lot and they're using Southwest Expressway. I expect spillover parking to go in that direction. Simply because it's convenient and easy, which will push those units, people who park on the street now, further into the adjoining neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, with that, I will close the public hearing. Yes? Yes, I'm going to close the public hearing and invite the applicant up again if he would like.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one comment regarding parking. Jennifer, you said that there's 590 parking stalls. In our last community outreach meeting, we actually had proposed 590 parking stalls for our residential project. We've since heard from the community, understood where they're coming from, and increased parking to 643 stalls. So it's more than one per unit. We heard you. We agree with you. We also agree with the city. We understand. We built a project right down the street from here, about a half a mile, called the Revere. It's actually in the city of Campbell. We were woefully overparked in that project. So we understand the desire for a reduced amount of parking. We also understand the community's concern about spillover parking. So we've tried to meet in the middle on this. Again, the residential parking is an 18% reduction from what's required. It's still a large reduction, but we do think it's, given the transit location, acceptable for the amount of units that we have on this site. I'd also say that this project is 80% studios and one bedrooms. So from a parking demand standpoint, studios and one bedrooms tend to have a lower parking demand than 2 and 3 bedroom units. So that hopefully will reduce some of the demand as well. We've taken all that into account as we've iterated through this process, and the parking number has gone up and down throughout time. But that's a comment I want to make on parking.
All right, we have a few questions for you, starting with Commissioner Yesney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You indicated that you have some architectural details.
We do.
Could you provide one that shows me that the roof isn't flat?
I will leave that up to my architect of WRNS and Brian Millman. We have a number of renderings that you can go through, or you can just speak to it.
Thank you. It's very nice architecture.
So let's just, can you pause there? Hi, I'm Brian Millman with WRNS Studio. So the roof is flat. I'm not going to try to make something up here, but so what was very important working with Jennifer and staff was that the roof was articulated and that it was had variation along it. So one of the things on the office building is, respective to it being a gateway as you're coming from Campbell and moving north on South Bascom, we really wanted to present that corner as something really important. So breaking the typical roof line of having a cornice with having a massing volume that kind of essentially marks that corner was something that was really important to us.
I don't like cornices either.
Well, we didn't give you a cornice on the corner, so that's good.
I have to tell you, the architecture is fabulous.
Thank you.
In my opinion. I'm definitely not an expert. But the most amazing part of it is that you've apparently convinced the staff that the roof isn't flat because the architecture is so varied and interesting.
Great.
And I think you may have actually pulled it off. The sides aren't flat by any stretch of the imagination, and the sheer interest maybe draws your eye away from the flat roof. So I'll let it go. I'll concede that it's a flat roof, but it's a very nice looking building.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Leba, do you have some questions?
Actually, I had questions on parking, not on, I make a personal policy, for the applicant, I make a personal policy not to comment on architecture because I'm by no means an expert. So I appreciate you raising the number back up. I used to live over in that side of town and actually had a hand back when and working on the South Bascom Urban Village. So I also appreciate you conforming to the urban village step back and setback rules, even though a signature project is not required. So thanks for that. As to the parking, I noticed that in the microfilm here on the plan set that you have like 56, if I'm reading that right, tandem parking spaces. How does that work? Is that typically like the second parking space for a unit?
Yeah, so we try to be very cautious about the number of tandem parking spaces that we put into any given project, given their complexities about access in and out of the spots and who gets them. What got us comfortable with this number is typically how we look at it, is we look at the number of 2 and 3 bedroom units that we're providing on site. We're providing 105 2 and 3 bedroom units with 56 tandem parkings. Typically the tandem parkings go to units that want more than one parking space, so that they can manage that in and out internally within that household. Sometimes that is one-bedroom units that have more than one parking stall, but the way we manage that and the experience that we've had is not to provide too many tandem parkings because that can become a management nightmare for the residents and for our own staff. And so we feel like the 56 tandem parking spaces is appropriate given the amount of 2 and 3 bedroom units.
Okay. And then, yes, that was my next question. Is this all, is it bundled or unbundled parking?
It is, it has not been decided if it's bundled or unbundled.
Okay, so that's not something we're writing into any of the standards. Okay. And then the last parking question was, you had said, and I know it's a different project, but this is for color since you brought it up as an example. When you say the Revere down the street was way over parked, do they charge for parking?
They do not charge for parking, no. It's built
Okay,
into
even
the
for like a second space?
Yeah.
Okay. And the reason I bring that up is we've had other developers mention that, you know, oh, these other developments are over parked, and then when you drill into it and find out it's $75 a space per month, that creates a financial incentive for somebody to park over in Pamlar and hike across the street. I would hike, yeah, a block to save, you know, 75 or 100 bucks a month. I'm pretty tight, so.
It makes it very difficult to convince people to pay for parking when a project is overparked as well.
Right, right, exactly. Okay. Those are all my questions right now. Oh, actually, I had one other question that I think I'd sent to Jennifer, but I don't think you had an answer in my list of bullets. And thank you, by the way, for all of those answers, because you didn't have to do that in the afternoon of the hearing. One community member in one of the letters in the 450-something pages of documentation we were given complained that there were 2 separate two-way driveways in the project. One was into the commercial facility and the other was in the residential facility. Just a few months ago, we approved downtown design guidelines, and I know this isn't downtown, but I'm just giving you an example, that literally called out, don't have too many entrances and exits, try to make them narrow, just to enhance a pedestrian experience, so pedestrians don't feel like they're walking across this minefield. Can you talk to why you have 2 driveway entrances and exits?
We engaged traffic consultants on this project, irrespective of our CEQA traffic consultants, to help us study ins and outs and loads coming out of both the buildings. One thing that we did have to do with the residential building was provide, in our opinion, for the project, provide 2 locations and ins and out for this project. We originally actually had them closer together. We worked with Public Works to provide a minimum feet distance between the driveways for that exact reason, to prevent problems like that. But it was purely a load-based decision on peak hours and when people are coming out to be able to handle the loads that were coming on. The office project is just one in and out into the parking of the office. There is a second in and out, as I believe Jennifer mentioned, for loading on the south side of the project. The entrance into the garage on the office building actually has 3 lanes to provide for that in and out flow based on the consultant's recommendations.
Okay. All right. Actually, I had one other question. Given that it's next to transit, was there any traffic mitigation or anything like that for residents being provided eco passes or VTA passes? We have
not programmed that in.
Okay.
No.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Griswold?
So I had a couple more, I'm not sure if this is working or not, a couple more questions about the parking. Just on the bundling, I know it hasn't been set on the residential. Was there any discussion of unbundling between the residential and commercial components? 'Cause I could see them having opposite hours.
There was a lot of discussion. Unfortunately, there have been projects built within this submarket recently. The biggest example of it was the Creekside at 17 project, which shares a parking garage with the hotel adjacent to it. There was major pushback from a tenant perspective and tenant demand to be able to share that parking garage with that. We were conscious of this being a little bit of an outlier location from a new spec office location. In addition, as I'm sure you could tell just by the renderings of it, this is we're targeting a high-tech tenant, larger floor plates. Those tenants in today's market are very security conscious and want control on parking from a security standpoint. You've seen that with eBay right down the street, who put up the fence around their entire project recently. It's becoming more and more of an issue from a tenant demand standpoint. So as we continued iterating through this project early on, we did have ideas of some sort of bundled parking between the two. And we decided that if we're gonna move forward and build this project, this was what is needed today. And if that changes in the future, maybe there's a way to mitigate it.
So speaking of changing in the future, is there any ability with the amount of parking that's provided or the way that it's structured to convert some of the parking structures to other usages in the future without significantly retrofitting the building?
There will be. The biggest example of such is on the office building. Our top parking floor height is higher than the rest of them. So we programmed that in on purpose. There may be an ability to convert that someday in the future. What that use is, what that looks like is to be determined, but we tried to be forward thinking on a project like this, realizing it was next to the train station, realizing the change in the use of automobiles today, and hopefully this becoming a more dense community in this location. We really hope that this project is a catalyst for the entire South Bascom urban village. And as it becomes more and more walkable, more and more usable, hopefully that happens in the future. We're not there today, unfortunately, which is why the 600 parking stalls in the office is pure math of 3 per 1,000 square foot, which is a demand that we're being told is absolutely needed from a tenant demand standpoint. But we tried to be, where we could, creative in programming it correctly so that there could be uses in the future.
So one more question for you. Actually, I've got two more, and then I'll stop. We heard a lot of comments about why your project doesn't have affordable housing on site, and it sounds like there's nothing that really we can do legally to force you to put it there. But I wonder if you could speak from a developer's perspective as to why you didn't do that and why you chose to pay in lieu fees, and what the city or through perhaps changes in regulations could do to make it easier for developers to actually incorporate affordable housing on site.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I hate to say it, but it's a pure economic decision. To build the units on site, it costs about double what our in lieu fee is on rough math. Because on this site, we're required to provide the 200,000 square feet of office. This is, again, not a traditional office location. We've committed to doing that. We've committed to building them at the exact same time. And for us to be able to take that risk, it needs to be offset somewhere. Unfortunately, part of that offset is in the housing component of this. There's significantly more demand for housing right now in this type of location. And so the best way to look at it from my perspective is it's an offset for the ability to build that right away and get this out of the ground now. Again, we're builders. We're not entitlement experts that entitle a site and then go sell it. We build our projects, and so when we take into account all of these different factors, we try to bring something to Planning Commission Council that we think we can build. And so for the ability to get 590 net new units to this location right now, with the housing crisis that we're in, we feel like that's more important, and be able to provide the 600-700 jobs that this location will provide. And so the ability to have to build the commercial and needs to be offset somewhere. And unfortunately, in this project, it's through affordable housing.
With the low-income rents, do you think that you'd be in a net negative position of where you'd be essentially subsidizing the unit in an ongoing basis, and how
Yes.
long would that be?
I don't know the answer about how long that would be, but it is more expensive. Construction costs are incredibly high right now, and they're not slowing down, unfortunately. And it's certainly not slowing down by as much as affordable housing rents are growing. And so that disparity is only getting wider and wider, which is why you're hearing more and more discussion about reducing fees and other aspects to try to get new housing being built. That disparity is getting larger and larger right now, unfortunately. And so yes, it is a net negative to build an affordable housing unit right now, and it's only done through subsidies.
Last question, this might be one for the architect perhaps, but, and it's sort of random, but the building is beautiful, and I was reading that the glass is transparent through the building. Does that pose any bird safety issues given the height of the building, and is there any mitigation measures for that?
It is something that we can continue looking at. There has been, it always depends on how close you are to a sanctuary site or to the bay. And so I believe right now that there aren't any requirements because of our proximity to any specific habitat. But it is something that we do consider and we'll keep considering as we select the glass, which hasn't been finalized yet.
And would you consider incorporating, I think in the downtown design guidelines we just adopted, there was some bird safety recommendations that were incorporated. Would you consider implementing them into this project?
I think I would have to talk to Bay West about that and understand what the implications are. I would say that it's not all glass, and so there is some metal extrusions and essentially fins that are around the glass volumes, and that definitely helps with the birds as they're kind of seeing the building and not seeing through it and knowing that they need to fly away. So it's something we can continue looking at with Bay West. And it's something we're very familiar with and have done on many other projects.
Thank you.
Commissioner Oliverio.
Thank you, Chair. One question is, what's the approximate construction cost to build something as this as a total project value?
Again, it depends on if it's today or in a year and what happens to construction costs, but this is plus or minus a $500 million project.
$500 million?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Yasny.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I forgot this question, and I see the VTA representative left. They're obviously not happy with the quiet zone, and neither is the railroad. So my question is, the noise reduction standards that this project will meet, especially for the residential, are they based on this remaining a quiet zone, or is it going to be adequate to mitigate single event noise without a quiet zone? Because those train whistles can get really loud in the middle of the night. Or so my neighbors tell me. I wear a hearing aid, I can't hear them. You could only rent to deaf people like me. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's Quintal Mather, I'm the environmental project manager. So just regarding noise, the noise study that was completed was based on the city's policies and guidelines.
Right.
So because it's talking about like operational and construction noise from the project, because the light rail is already there, it's existing conditions. So it wasn't really, it wasn't kind of
The
factored in.
general plans identifies noise reduction standards for new housing built on the environment, the existing environment. So the standards that the noise consultant would have measured were the existing noise conditions, and the mitigation would have been based on those conditions. In other words, the construction standards that would be implemented at the building permit stage. Are those noise standards based on how noisy it is now in a quiet zone? Is that when the readings were taken?
Oh, I see what you mean, okay.
Because if that quiet zone goes away, it's going to get louder. And single event noise usually means that a bedroom has to maintain 45 LDN in order for people to sleep. Okay, actually, you don't need to satisfy me on this. You need to satisfy yourselves that the conditioning for this project and the standard that goes forward takes into account that the quiet zone may also go away.
Let us check the noise section right now, because when they were taking the noise measurement for this project, yes, we did look at, as part of the general plan policy for interior noise and how the existing condition and the environment would play on future residents as part of the policy. However, I am not entirely sure if the fact or the intention of the quiet zone going away was part of that. since we were looking at of it now.
And it might not go
Yeah.
away, but, okay. So the condition should take that into account. Thank you.
And this is something that can be addressed as a project approval condition if it's not in there. But this is an amendment, so definitely there's noise impact analysis which shows that operational and construction noise impacts will be mitigated.
Well, and which worries me less than, the condition might not even be formulated until building permit, because this is the PD permit, so what's here is here. So
I would like to respond to that. So
Okay.
yes, so as part of our standard permit condition, in addition to just the mitigation measure, was that to ensure that the interior noise will be at 45, which is the general plan. So at building permit, that's one of the condition that they would have to satisfy, including a acoustic study at that time for
They
interior
do,
noise.
they do an updated study when they, okay, thank you very much.
Are there any other questions from commissioners for staff now?
I'm fine.
All right, I would like to ask a couple questions. One of the requirements of a signature project is around community outreach, and I believe the staff report said that there were 2 meetings with a lot of folks involved, which is great. And then I heard from the developer and maybe a few other community members that there were other meetings going on. Maybe they were on the urban village planning process, but I'm just wondering if you can say a little more about the community outreach piece of this project. And I ask because in my mind, you know, going above and beyond our typical community outreach process doesn't necessarily look like 2 community meetings. In my mind, it would be kind of alternative ways of reaching out to the community and working with the community. And it sounds like the end result was a good one at the end of the day, but I'm just going forward in terms of how we're evaluating signature projects. I really would like for the community outreach to be super special. So can you talk a little bit more about what was here?
Sure. So so under our council policy 6-30, which controls the public outreach processes, not all projects that come through the planning division require community meetings. And so signature projects being as popular, if you will, or controversial, depending on what word you'd like to choose, we hold 2 meetings, and we hold them at distinct points in the process to make sure we elicit the right amount of feedback. And we also notice them at greater radii than our standard 500 feet. And so that's part of how we try to reach out to the community. We go to 1,000 feet, increase the radii. In addition to that, we collect an email distribution list, because a lot of the community members express the interest to be contacted via email. They don't always get the postcard. If they do get the postcard, they don't know what it is, and the email is another way we go about it. In addition to that, we maintain a Projects of High Interest webpage where we keep people up to date, and every time we have some sort of update, new plans are submitted, we update that website. When we have our community meetings, we try to go above and beyond for signature projects in particular by providing different ways to collect public comment to make sure it's reflected. Not everyone is comfortable speaking out in a room full of their neighbors. And so comment cards are provided. Uniquely to this situation, because it overlapped with the South Bascom Urban Village process, this project got multiple meetings in addition to the typical signature project process or other larger projects like in downtown. And we were able to see a lot of familiar faces come out and get that dialogue. But we've always been available and willing to talk to the community and to make sure all of the comments are there. We connect them with the developer if they want to talk to them directly. But we're fulfilling our requirements with the council policy, and we try to go above and beyond within our means. We also do post on social media. Our communications team handles that, and we find some pretty great success with getting on Facebook, Nextdoor, and Instagram.
Thank you. The VTA letter, which I appreciated, talked about potentially suggesting a TDM plan, and I'm wondering if you could comment on. So there isn't one apparently, and so why? When do we do or not have a TDM plan, and why was the choice made here not to have one?
Sure. So the municipal code requires a transportation demand management or TDM plan to be required if a project is reducing parking by more than 20%. So that's how they get that increased reduction of the additional 30 to 50 total of reduction. Since the project, as Brian mentioned, is reducing the residential by 18% and then the office by 12, I got it right this time. And that's a cumulative like 15% average reduction. They're not subject to the TDM requirements. And staff doesn't have like a legal way to require them to mandate that they do that. They could volunteer to put in measures, which does happen down the road, and that's something that they will have to decide if as part of like their leasing package they want to do that, but it's not part of our requirements currently in our municipal code.
So I'd be curious to know if the developer might want to voluntarily do some of that. You seem like a very nice gentleman who might like bikes.
We obviously take all of this into consideration as we continue to progress with plans forward. Part of that is how our construction documentation come out. What does the market look like at the time that we're building a project? Again, if something changes depending on who leases the building, it can change over and over throughout the process between now at entitlement all the way through completion of the project. It's hard for us to commit to something right now when we don't know what that flexibility is going to be, so we tend not to commit right now. So that's kind of what it's going to be for us right now.
I have a series of questions, I'm sorry. I would like to say I loved seeing the different paving materials in some of the renderings. It's really nice to see that detail in there. Keeps things interesting as a pedestrian. The VTA letter, again, made a comment, I think if I'm interpreting it correctly, and maybe I'm not, but it triggered for me the notion that, so the public plaza is connecting to the train station, the light rail station, which is fantastic. If you're a pedestrian on the sidewalk there, I thought what the VTA letter was suggesting was some wayfinding, some signage to help people understand that the station is there. Was I interpreting that correctly, and is that going, I know that's like a huge detail in the weeds, but it seems like it's important for folks to know that, like, hey, the train station is this way.
Sure. So as part of this project, they're conditioned for their public plaza to have wayfinding signage, and there's distance requirements put in there saying within 20 feet of the right-of-way, so like the sidewalk or the street, they have to have a sign that says, this is open to you and you can go this way. And so people can see that. The other thing that was really important to staff and to the community, which was reflected in the South Bascom plan, is maintaining a sight line. So that when people are on South Bascom, they can look through and they're like, what is this space? I can see a light rail station in the distance. And so maintaining that is gonna help people feel more comfortable transversing that space and actually accessing the light rail. But they can work out some of those specifics. They have subsequent permits that they have to work with VTA, and they can work on that later if they need subsequent signage.
And then one last question that's not related to this project necessarily, but related, and that is, since we're opening up access to the station from that side of the train tracks, which is absolutely wonderful, for the condo development that's to the north of the site, will they be able to access it as well? I know it's peripheral, it's not your responsibility to convince them that they should break down a wall or something, but I'm just wondering if that opportunity is being looked at.
So the adjacent HOA, when they approve the project, they have a public access easement on their own property. And then there's a gate that have direct access onto the existing Dick Center shopping center. There is no requirement placed upon this property to provide continued public access for them to use it and actually legally cross onto the property. The way that the site is laid out, and I don't know if to the north there's an EVA, so we have fire access for fire trucks. We cannot place a public access easement across our EVA. It is not safe, and the fire department will not approve that. And so we're wrestling with those issues. Additionally, there's going to be a slight grade differential between this property and the condo complex off of Stokes, where if access were to be granted, ADA enhancements would have to be provided on the HOA property for them, because they're going to be down a little bit lower than this property to allow proper drainage of stormwater. So it's multifold. And there's nothing for us to do legally to require that access.
So if I get what you're saying, there are things on the HOA side that they would have to adjust in order to make that doable, to connect to the station there. But also importantly, so that would be their responsibility, not the developer's responsibility. But also an additional constraint is that this applicant, this developer would need to grant access to those folks through their property.
Correct, and they cannot do that over their EVA, their emergency access. We don't want pedestrians having access to our emergency fire lanes on a property. And it was something that we talked about. It was brought up by the community. The developer considered it, but given these constraints with safety, it was not pursued.
So in that constraint with safety is that in the case of an emergency, that lane would need to be accessible to, say, a fire truck or an emergency vehicle,
Correct.
which may happen. How often does that happen?
I hope never.
So anyway, I guess I would put a question mark next to that policy. I understand there's some constraints currently with the policy, and it seems to me that maybe that's something that should be evaluated by the council, since we can't necessarily change policy here.
If I could add in something to the record, Joe Provenzano, Public Works. Good evening. I agree that we wouldn't want to encumber the EVA with a public access easement, given the rights, but it doesn't preclude the developer from allowing the community, the HOA north of him, to walk through the site. If he wants to work out a gate system, that's his own rights and responsibilities, and he can help promote getting people to the gateway, or to the light rail station. He doesn't have to encumber it with a public access easement.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we're thinking along the same lines. So, so to the policy, having a pedestrian cross a driveway would seem to not be a problem, because they're not a permanent fixture unless they're setting up a lemonade stand permanently there. But to your point, you're saying that you could still do it, it just wouldn't be anything legally on the books for the property, and it still allow those folks from Sonador Commons to make access if the developer was into that.
Absolutely, that's my understanding. It's his prerogative to allow whom he wants to cross the site, and if he would like to add a gate or promote the gate system from the neighborhood there, then that's his prerogative.
Yeah, so I guess just my last comment on that is, for the folks who live there, if there's a station right there, they can see it, but they still have to walk all the way around to get to it. It's going against our general plan goals and policies. And so if there's a way that we can make that work in the context of this development and this application before us, that would be really nice.
It's not that bad. It's about a 6-minute walk. I do it every day.
Okay.
But keep in mind, that's usually a two-way. People come and people go, and having strangers come in your back gate might not be what they want.
So those are all the questions that I have. Anything else from my fellow commissioners?
I have just a question for staff. This is also not related specifically to this project, but regarding the in lieu fee for housing. That's not surprising. I knew that the in lieu fee is usually, especially with the cost of construction nowadays, much lower than what it would cost to put these units on site and to have to rent them at those rates. Has there been any consideration from staff or direction from council regarding looking at that fee and a way to account for the fact that construction costs being what they are, it's not really feasible to expect a whole lot of developers, unless they're really magnanimous, to come to us with on-site affordable housing? So I don't know if there's been any discussion. I know there are legal ramifications. We did get sued by the builders before on this, but could you speak to anything that might be in there?
The housing department is currently working on an inclusionary housing ordinance, and I think that will be considered as part of it.
Great, thank you. I would highly recommend that.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Is there a motion that anyone
Madam
would
Chair,
like to?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
I'll second, please.
All right, motion by Commissioner Yezny and second by Vice Chair Leba. Commissioner Yezny, would you like to comment on your motion?
Only a little. I know I gave the staff a hard time about the flat roofs. I'm hoping that humor will work where nagging doesn't. Tearing pages out of the plan set. And one point I want to make is the architecture on this building really is extraordinary in the extent to which it doesn't look like a flat roof building. Which is maybe what we should really be, maybe that's what you're doing, is encouraging them to do something that's so attractive, nobody notices if it has a flat roof. And that's okay with me. It's gonna be a very different look on Bascom, and it's certainly gonna look a heck of a lot better than eBay. Incidentally, eBay has attack hawks on their property. I should warn you that, you know, they went after the employees. And they're protected, so you can't do anything about them. But I think this is going to be something we'll look at with a great deal of pride, flat roof or not. And so that's why I made the motion.
I don't like these mics, which are always on. I'm used to pushing a button. So, a couple things. First, I want to thank all the community members that came out here and came out to the couple community meetings. I happened to attend the first one a little over a year ago in June 2018. Very heavily attended, practically standing room only, lots of people giving feedback and then going to the various sheets on the wall and so forth. There's great community interest in this, and I know a lot of the neighborhood leaders kind of pushed it on social media so their neighbors would know about it. So that said, I also want to commend the developer once again for the setback, and step back adjacent to Sonador Commons. I know that it doesn't seem like a lot of a setback for folks that might be immediately right there, but it's better than we've seen in a lot of other projects, which are kind of going up to the lot line. And as this was a signature project, that wasn't required for them to conform to the urban village plan, which is actually got watered down into a suggestion, so it's not quite, not even strict there. So I really appreciate that. I think that's great. You know, the project looks good. I think we've struck a balance in terms of, you know, amenities and parking and the sight lines and the paseo in the middle and all that. So I just wanted to say I'm glad to support it. Thank you.
Anyone else want to speak to it? Commissioner Allen?
Thank you. Just a few comments. I also want to echo my fellow commissioners. Thanks to everyone from the public who came out tonight. I do want to apologize and thank you for accommodating the change in room. We are definitely not messing with you, I promise. I know the City Hall is going through some HVAC updates. Maybe that's what's going on in the council chambers. But thank you for coming. Thank you for attending. Thank you for speaking and bringing all of these issues to our attention. It's especially important for me to get input from people who live in the immediate vicinity of a project. Knowing how important that is to me as a San Jose native, having been here my whole life, I wouldn't want anyone from another neighborhood telling me what should go or what is more appropriate for my neighborhood. I do think that I agree with Chair Ballard. This project could have used, I think, more intentional and robust community outreach, just as a signature project. Although I do think that the city could do a better job of defining the signature project requirements, frankly, beyond just the base numbers of how many residential units or how much square footage of housing. Like, if we're really going to call something a signature project, to the point of Mr. Shore from Catalyze SV, we really need to call it a signature project. It really should go above and beyond. And the developer, while we can't maybe hold them to certain conditions legally, I do think that for a signature project, we should ask more. That being said, I think this is a good compromise. I think you've heard that there are very conflicting views on what is an appropriate parking allotment for this site, or in a variety of other areas. So I think that the developer has had to work really hard with the community and with the city and to get something that works. So I think it does. Is it perfect? No. Is it everything I would like to see from this site? No. But then again, to the point of someone who spoke, I have lived in this area my whole life. I know that I've known this site to be pretty much blighted my entire life. So I'm really excited to see something happening there. And unfortunately for Rod Dearden Sr., it's not 30-story buildings, but that's what he envisioned one day. So hey, if you're worried about 10 stories, it could have been a lot worse, I guess. Anyway, I believe that's all I have, so thank you very much again to everyone, and I'll be voting in favor of the motion.
I too wanted to speak to the motion. I wanted to go back to my comments about TDM. I understand there's a trigger for when it gets required, and I would simply say, I guess I would wonder, why not have a TDM program for every project, in particular ones that are going into an urban village? You know, we like to think if we build it, they will behave in a certain way that we want them to behave in terms of taking transit. And I certainly hope that's the case, but I would love to and encourage the developer to work out a TDM plan, you know, providing VTA passes, programmatic stuff to do some hand-holding with the residents to help them learn how to use transit. I know for myself, it wasn't until someone showed me how to use light rail that I was like, oh, this is super easy. Why haven't I been doing this more? And it just takes that little piece of hand-holding. So I really would encourage staff and the applicant to be working on a TDM program together. And if you have any questions about how to park your site in terms of bike parking, I'm happy to help. I also, just some general comments. This area is like really special. Like there's some cool things going on there. You have the trail right there, you have a station, you have Whole Foods down the street and See's Candy. So there's
Campbell.
I thought that was the San Jose side.
The Jamba Juice is in San Jose.
Sean was in San Jose. I went there today.
Anyway, so I'm really pleased to see this moving in this direction, and I love to see the renderings with all the green paint on the ground and the potential for wider sidewalks and bicycling. And the last thing I wanted to do was just amplify a message that was in one of the letters from the Neighborhood Association that I think, Randy, you signed. And that was on the in-lieu fees and noting the fact that in this area we have a lot of what we call naturally occurring affordable housing. And this area is going to go through a lot of transformation, and folks who are in those homes in naturally occurring affordable housing are going to be displaced. And so, you know, we don't currently have strong policies that address that. I hope that in the next year, the city will be doing something like that. I know that there's a series of focus groups and forums coming up. Tomorrow is one of them at the Seven Trees Community Center talking about this issue, because the city is going to have a study session on anti-displacement policies. So I think that's the place to have that conversation, and I just wanted to amplify that message here, that even though we can't say these in-lieu fees need to be used for this purpose, that there is a policy conversation going on right now where potentially we can say that in the future, that one of the city's priorities is anti-displacement. Yeah. So that's all, and with that, I too will be voting for the motion. So, Commissioner Oliverio.
Thank you, Chair. I want to especially call out Jennifer Piozza on planning staff and all those planning staff that was involved in the community meetings. I attended both of those meetings, and sometimes in these discussions, they can become very tense, and dealing with, you know, just dealing with that. So I really appreciate staff's ability to manage those processes. I think planning management should recognize the efforts they have taken to do so. And in addition, I've had the opportunity to attend every single urban village meeting for Bascom, and this was always in a discussion of this parcel. So as planning commissioners, we have a very narrow focus, and that's to approve applications that fit within the general plan, zoning, that come with professional planning staff recommendations. There are things that we may want, but we are not the body to enforce things, because that's a higher level than us. But we can certainly have that discussion, and those certainly happen at the community meetings. I want to be clear, though, that you know, the general plan, and not everyone follows it, right? It's like, people, what are that? Even though we had community meetings for 5 years that I sat on, and I would not want to do that again for 5 years. That said, it's done with the intention, based on state law, to understand where we build and where we build housing density. And in the case of San Jose, because 60% of our employed workforce leaves the city for work, our intention is to have somewhere to work within the city so we don't all have to drive. I myself drive to Redwood City, love the company, But you know what? It really is a pain to be in that car every day for such a long, congested area, and my commute's not as bad as others. So I think that's the goal, and that's why you're seeing this project the way it's developed. And I think there's, what I saw at the meeting, and I always see at these meetings, are people very concerned about density and height. And I just want to provide the understanding for people is that our city has transitioned. It was under Mayor Hammer where we decided the voters wanted to have an urban green belt around the city so we wouldn't continue to grow. It was under Mayor Chuck Reed that we took housing out of Coyote Valley so that could remain in an agricultural area. Coyote Valley sits between San Jose and Morgan Hill. Under Mayor Liccardo, there was an initiative to have a tremendous amount of housing in Evergreen, and the voters voted that down. And so what's that leave us is we have a footprint of a city, and we're building within that city, and that comes with density. And in this particular location, especially when it's next to fixed rail, light rail, it becomes the place to put it. And that's just the reality, and it may be uncomfortable for some, but this process has been in, at least for this parcel, for I'm gonna say about 20 years. And has always have a rendition of this parcel, what it'll look like in the future. And that's just the case. The existing population of our city between when the general plan was adopted, and I believe 2010, 2011, and between then and 2040, the existing population of San Jose is going to birth 250,000 children. Some of those children will want to remain here, and you can't build that much housing instantaneously. It's in increments, and even 590 units is not going to cover what the growth is organically within our city. So I just want to for people to understand why that's the case. I go to these meetings and people will complain that, you know, that their son is living with them or their daughter is living with them and they don't have anywhere to live, but the housing development that's proposed, they oppose it. And, you know, there's that connection, and I understand it because I think people have, you know, especially folks that have been in San Jose for decades, you're used to having a single-family home environment. But the city is changing, and for the number of housing units, if you wanted to build this in the neighborhood such as Pamlar, which I'm very familiar with, Mike and Joan Lynch have lived on that street for 40, 50 years, and Joan just passed away. But with that said, you would need 160 acres versus this is whole parcel 7, and I think roughly let's call it 4. That's a tremendous amount of land we don't have. So just take it with a grain of salt that people are trying to plan for the future, and it may not agree with you, but people are trying to be thoughtful about it, and we can agree to disagree, but this is, you know, the role the city's playing in today's day and age. And as you may read from papers, if you don't approve housing in the state of California, you will be sued by the state of California, as different cities such as Cupertino and Huntington Beach, et cetera. So thank my commissioners for allowing me to say that, but I just feel, I know a lot of the folks in the crowd didn't speak, but I recognize that they had issues with density and height, and I just want to give a little more context.
Thank you. So with that, let's go ahead and vote. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion carries unanimously. So, thank you all for coming out. We're going to move on to number 6, referrals from city council, board, commissions, or other agencies, and it says there's no items here. So moving on to good and welfare. Is there a report from city council?
Yes, 3 items were recommended by this commission to city council, and all items were approved. Specifically, they were item 2.16, which is the amendment to Title 21 of the San Jose Municipal Code for Environmental Review. It was approved as recommended. Item 10.1A, which is conforming rezoning for real property located at 397 Saratoga Avenue, also approved as recommended by the commission. And the last one is 10.1B, which is conforming rezoning for real property located at 399 South 24th Street, also approved as recommended by the commission.
Great. All right. Then the next item is to review and approve the action minutes from 7:24. Is there a motion?
I do have a correction.
There is a
Yes,
correction.
per the city attorney's recommendation, we made a change from the vote of 5-0-1, from 6-0 to 50-1, because Commissioner Olivero was absent. He came in right before voting, but then he didn't listen to he didn't have the chance to listen to the debate and the questions and answers from staff. And
Do you have the ability to listen from your car because you stream the meetings on the phone,
That's
on the
right.
internet, FYI?
But this is from City Attorney's recommendation.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you.
There was another correction also to one of the, a condition of approval was left off of,
And that was added
I
at the
can't
end.
remember which item it was, the last one, I think. The Middlebrook.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and I was sent the amended minutes, so I
That's
know
right,
it's
and
there.
that has been corrected by staff.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Madam Chair, I'll move with those adjustments.
Okay. Is there a second?
Yes, so that revision is in there.
Seconded by Commissioner Oliverio. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Any subcommittee formation reports and outstanding business? No. Commission calendar and study sessions, anything? No.
Chair, would it be appropriate to make a comment to planning staff? And I'm not sure which point that would be, but that, had we already passed?
Let's do it under E.
Great.
Go.
Okay, real quick, I know there was commentary on only 2 community meetings, but I'll tell you from my background, having professional planning staff at the meeting versus these independent meetings that developers do with segments of people or interest groups, I find that to be worse. Because then they tell one person one thing and another person something else, versus a meeting that's actually done in this capacity where we did 2 meetings with significant outreach. At least we know everyone's on the same page, and we have professional planning staff that's as there as a neutral arbiter versus, because I've seen these meetings where they'll tell the public and they throw the city under the bus when that's not the case. And I think, I like the process that occurred for this, so I just wanted to throw that out there. And secondarily,
noted.
Things come to us, right? And people go, oh, I want more density. I want more density, but, the application before us is what it is, right? So I just want to understand that from the planning staff point of view, that each application that's coming forward, planning staff is looking to maximize the density in each and every, as you review it, because I think at the end of the day, when it comes to the commission, it's sort of too late. Oh, it should be taller, it should have more units. Well, that's what's been approved, and so I'm assuming, or give me a response if you want, that's always looked at on every application that comes forward.
I can answer from a development review standpoint. We review what the developer brings, but in terms of environmental review, we look at the worst case scenario, what is the maximum allowable development, so that in case anything changes, then we could do an addendum or something much less time consuming.
I actually want to chime in on the community outreach piece. And because I don't think, my comments weren't suggesting that developer outreach is better. And maybe you weren't suggesting that I was suggesting that. But I would love to see us, and I know this is hard, and I don't even know what it looks like, but for cities everywhere to be radically reimagining what community engagement looks like. Even this format here, right? This is a thing. Some people like it, some people don't. And so figuring out ways to accommodate, and it sounds like, you guys are thinking about this and social media and trying to provide different avenues for people to engage. And I think that there's lots more that we could be doing, and to really center community in how we do things would mean we would do things differently. So I think the community meetings are important, and we have to do them, and there's just so many people out there who still go, wait, what? What? This is going on? They never hear about it. Well, then they might, and they, like I've said before, like if you infiltrate the dog walking groups, you're going to bring some new people to the table. If you have the guy on the liquor at my liquor store, I've said this before. If you want to get the word out in our neighborhood, equip the guy at our liquor store who owns our liquor store to tell people, hey, there's a community meeting, you should go. And that's how I would find out, because I never open my mail and I don't go to next door. So anyway, what I'm saying is, like, there are lots of different ways that we can be doing this, And I'd love to see us continuing to experiment and see what works.
I'd like to see us hire enough staff to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, yep.
Madam Chair, if I could, real quick. I am remiss, actually. I usually in my comments like to do this. Thank you so much for all your work, staff, on this project and every project and at the community meetings, but except for the. But no, seriously, thank you very much for all that you guys do. I like to include that in all my comments, but I forgot to say thank you.
I would like a correction here for the.
And I guess I want to just add a little point to that too. It did seem like with the number of meetings that it's not the number of meetings, but the quality of the meetings and then the follow-up afterwards. And so when we say, you know, how many meetings was there, that doesn't fully reflect probably all of the dialogue. I've seen so many emails from Jennifer where she's responding to the concerns and forwarding that to the developer, and we don't really see that component. So it's hard to evaluate from this position really what that dialogue was like. I think we can get a sense of it from the comments that are put forth and what the community members say. And we heard today a lot of the community members saying that they felt like it was a collaborative process. But at some point, there's just going to be people that want more parking, less parking, higher buildings, lower buildings, and there's going to be a compromise. But
I just wanted to add, at the June meeting last year, just for benefit of staff that weren't there, Jennifer did a really nice job kind of reining. Do you remember we had a few hecklers? There were a couple people just lost it, started hollering and yelling from the back, and she did a nice job of reining the meeting in and having a focused conversation. And I also appreciated that your notes of what came from the meeting were very thorough, and they're not always thorough, but you do a nice job, so
Well
thank you.
noted. Thank you.
All right.
I especially appreciate the word-for-word comment reiterations. Those are great.
All right, meeting adjourned. Motion to adjourn.